Hello and welcome to this telesummit on feminism as a sustainability tool. I'm Jenny Lamorgan. I'm a social entrepreneur and owner of greenwomanstore.com, where education is a priority and we enjoy creating educational tools like this telesummit on topics important to us as women. Feminism and sustainability are two collective quests that touch every aspect of our lives. Feminism has always brought hope, a lot of hard work, and truth to every issue it touches. We'll talk about the important role that women and feminism play in real, lasting, and global sustainability. Our goal is to bring you hope and tools for the future and an expanded global reality. I'm excited to be here with our co-host, Carolyn Gage, to bring you experts on the topic of feminism with case studies from the U.S. and around the world. Carolyn is a lesbian feminist playwright, performer, director, and activist. She is the author of 12 books and more than 65 plays, musicals, and one-woman shows. She specializes in non-traditional roles for women and reclaims famous women's stories that have been distorted or erased from our history entirely. In 2014, Carolyn was one of 6 featured playwrights at the 53rd Annual World Theater Day in Rome, sponsored by UNESCO. And now I'd like to introduce you to our guest, a nationally published journalist and writer and medical doctor, Dr. Mana Kasongo-Robinson. Dr. Kasongo was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. After receiving her master's degree in journalism from the Columbia School of Journalism, she co-founded the Black Star News, a weekly investigative newspaper in New York City, focusing on news that addresses critical issues affecting African and African American communities. Dr. Kasongo went on to receive her medical degree and is currently an attending physician at Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. She is interested in healthcare here in the United States and in developing countries. During a visit to Kenya with a team of medical professionals, Dr. Kasongo was approached by a maternity ward staff nurse. The nurse asked Dr. Kasongo if she was capable of delivering a baby. They hurried next door to discover that the young woman had been in labor for over 16 hours and was now in danger of losing her life and the life of her baby if she didn't receive surgery. The family of the pregnant girl had never pleaded with staff to take their daughter to hospital. Understanding the limitations that these families face can be difficult for volunteers to interpret or comprehend. It was not until after Dr. Kasongo and the medical team were able to rush the young woman to a nearby hospital, and she and the baby were both living and well, that the family's tears began to flow, and their gratitude toward the medical team. The baby was named Mana after Dr. Kasongo. And there's more to this story. Before Dr. Kasongo left on this trip for Kenya, she was approached by a stranger in her hair salon who overheard her plans. After a few moments and a few questions, the woman handed Dr. Kasongo a check. The amount was precisely enough to cover the expenses of the emergency hospitalization for this young woman. This is only one amazing story of love and caring that Dr. Kasongo will share with us here today. And now I turn the mic over to our co-host, Carolyn Gage. Welcome, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is just an incredible pleasure and a privilege to be talking with Mana today about her work, because it's just so broad-reaching. There's this journalism in New York, and then this clinic in Georgia, then the work in Kenya, and then she's also done some international analytical work. So we're going to sort of try to cover all of that. But, yeah, what a life, huh? What I just have a feeling you kind of go where Mana, I just want to ask you, you just kind of go where the light is, right? Is that why you've ended up doing such eclectic different things?
That is the way that I look at things. And thank you so much, Jenny, for having me here. And thank you, Carolyn, for discussing this with me. And thank you for bringing me back to that space where where we were in Kenya, where I felt as if this was the place that I need to be at that precise moment, and how it impacted their individual lives, but that it actually did more for my life. But yes, you're correct. Following the light is the way that we go, and you follow the things that mean the most to you in your life. Mean the most. You basically go where you think you are best, where you are needed and wanted, and that's what brings me to the different places I'm at, including rural Georgia right now.
I know, I love that part. But before we get to your current life in Georgia, let's back up to this Black Star News.
Yes.
And as soon as I saw the name of your paper, because I'm working on a play about a woman who was in the administration of Garvey's UNIA organization, Marcus Garvey, and of course he was an African American with a wildly ambitious vision for his people, and that included a shipping line, and he called it Black Star, kind of because the White Star, cruise ships were currently really popular and with white people, and so he had this Black Star. So I saw that, I was like, oh wow, she's named her newspaper after Marcus Garvey's most ambitious enterprise. You tell me something about how that came about, why and how that came about.
Well, Black Star News was really formed out of a void that was left after a pre-existing investigative newspaper called the City Sun was essentially out of business. It was a newspaper that was based out of Brooklyn, that was Black-owned, Black-centered, and it mainly did investigative stories that looked into the everyday lives of Black and brown people in New York City, and everywhere from housing to education. And I was more of their science reporter, and it was the first job that I got out of journalism school. I really went into journalism to be an advocate. So I believe in advocacy journalism. Some people say that you're not supposed to really have a side, but in my case, I really think that you do need to have a side because you're advocating for people who don't have a voice. So essentially, we focus mainly on the health section and mainly on advocating for fair wages for hospital workers and their families, and that's what I did. And once I got there, unfortunately, because of the economic issues that a lot of papers are facing now, but certainly predated sort of early on in a lot of Black newspapers felt earlier, the place closed. So after 6 months after I get there, it closes. So myself and the editor decided at the time at the City Sun, we're going to just go ahead and try to start our own. I mean, it was a startup, it was a build up, it was a day by day thing, and through that we came up with the idea of the Black Star News. And so while it's a New York based paper, clearly from the name, the Black Star News, we are trying to connect Black and brown people internationally to the lives of other people in Africa, in South America, and all over the world.
I asked you a little bit of a practical question. Were you able to take with you the subscribers of the newspaper that folded, or did you just launch on your own with trying to raise the venture capital for this, or how did that startup come about?
Oh, yes. So we were able to tap into those resources, and a lot of the City Sun had a lot of people who were very much upset about it going down under. So when it was time for us to try to do this, there were a lot of people who were very supportive because they didn't think that there's a void in the community when a paper like that disappears.
Oh, absolutely.
The people don't lose interest, and the problems don't go away. So we were able to tap into that base, and that's where we actually got some of the seed funding as well as the inspiration to continue going, because that's a pretty tall task, particularly to do in New York City, where expenses can be very difficult, and it's a hard place to kind of navigate at times. But certainly that was very helpful.
How many people see their jobs go away and just stand up and say, nope, I'm going to take this over and start something else? That's just wonderful that you were able to. And so it is still going strong. And what is your role in it now that you're no longer New York-based? What is your role with the Black Star News now?
It's more as a contributing editor at large. It's more it's more advisory at this point. It really it has a very strong presence on the internet, and so we're able to get a lot of different pieces from people from around the world now, because we're known around the world.
That is wonderful.
As a place to tell a story, whether it's, from, what's going on in Mali to what's going on in Colombia. And we're always focused on looking at the people who do not have voices, which unfortunately in most parts of the world end up being the people who are browner and who are not engaged, who are basically not a part of the discussion, whatever that discussion is. So we want to be voices to that, and we want to give.
So important, and I love that it's so international. I think that's, well, you're living up to Garvey. Garvey was very, very invested in the ties with Africa in an era where that was not really very popular. It wasn't on a lot of people's radar. It was,
which is always very surprising to me. I never understood why he sort of engendered a lot of ire, because if you think about it, he was just saying that if Black people could find a way to own their own companies and own their own different, organizations and their own means to getting around, how much more empowered would they be, and how much better life would have been here for people of color?
I think a lot of it is about that. He was very much he was very much watching what was going on in Ireland, and he was very focused on having one's own land, and he saw the promise of that in Africa. But it was an era, I think, because of the trauma of slavery, which was, I think Garvey was, in his heyday was around 1919, when there was just peak racist violence after World War I, and the soldiers returning and not wanting to do business as usual, and tremendous white attempts to continue business as usual. Anyway, that was kind of his heyday, and this wasn't that far away from slavery. And I think that in the African American community, it seemed that there was that people were distancing themselves from Africa and that heritage, that legacy, not seeing the promise of it, but seeing the traumatic history and all the stigma attached to that. And so he had this vision that was so radical. For his time, but it also was ahead of its time. I think that had he come along in the 60s, there would have been, with the Pan-African movement, there would have been this huge embrace of his ideas.
He was probably a person before his time.
Yeah, it was all about Tuskegee and so on. But enough about that, and it's on my mind because of the play I'm working on. But how did you get from journalism in New York to rural Georgia and medicine? There must have been some kind of a big shift in the wind there when you turned your life in another direction.
Well, to be honest, the way that this kind of happened, I've always been, as a person who's born in the Congo and who's lived in Liberia as a preteen and who's lived in different places, I always thought that I wanted to work in a place, I wanted to work as a physician, but I also wanted to be a writer. And these were things that had always been part of my DNA. My dad's a professor. My mom has been a nurse's aide. So this is stuff that I grew up with, and I knew that I wanted to be able to combine those two things. So once I got into journalism school, which I loved and really found a place for, I still had this desire to still work with the physical body. I wanted to be a physician. I wanted to be able to take those skills that I have as those communication skills and then translate them into the ability to communicate lifestyle and lifestyle changes and working with people and helping them get through their day-to-day. So after journalism school, I worked for a while and as a working journalist, and then went back to medical school. Sort of did a complete, in one sense, a 180, and focused my time on getting through medical school and doing residency. And I went to medical school in Chicago and then moved to New York City, back to New York City to do my residency at New York City, at NYU, and at Bellevue. So once again, it's still, while it was a different area that I was focused on, it still followed the same worldview, the same paradigm that I always had, which is that you always have to work in a place in which you are needed and where you work as, you want to be a part of something that is empowering. And Bellevue Hospital, as you know, was the first psychiatric hospital in the country, and it's probably one of the largest public hospitals in the world.
Yeah, it has a history. Bellevue does.
A history, very hefty, and that was something that was not lost upon me. And I went there intentionally, making sure that I was exposed to people who literally will get off of a plane at JFK with a suitcase and come to Bellevue Hospital because they know they're going to get great care there, and they know they have people there that will care for them. And these are people who are coming straight from, Bangladesh, and coming straight from, any country that you can imagine. And the first place they come is to Bellevue Hospital. And so to be a part of something like that, that's more
I didn't know
than
about Bellevue.
Oh yes. So that is much more about medicine. That's just more about what the world does in terms of its healthcare and how we treat people who come from other places and how we get them involved into our healthcare system and what we can do for them outside of the U.S. But that also means that I was also caring about what people, how people lived in New York City, people who don't have a lot of resources. So that fit into the same worldview that I've always had.
So what was your specialty? Was it psychiatric medicine? If you were,
No, it was actually emergency medicine. So I am an emergency room physician, and emergency medicine has always been, in my mind, the best way for me to get involved immediately into people's lives. Because my decision, for example, to go into medicine, I knew that when I was 10 years old, when I went to the hospital myself as a patient, when I was living in Liberia, many, many, many years ago, I knew that I was being helped by a physician who, in my mind as a kid, I felt like he was overwhelmed. I walked into this room and it was just filled with people that only one person was going to be able to take care of. And he just seemed overwhelmed. And in my 10-year-old mind, I thought to myself, I want to do what he does because I want to be able to.
Wonderful.
I want to do him, right? I want to do what he does. And I want
that's amazing. And look at you. That's completely what you're doing. And so then, all right, so you're back in New York, but you're doing medicine. How'd the connection to Georgia happen?
Well, what ended up happening is I started thinking to myself, okay, I was getting towards the end of my residency program. It was, clear that I was going to have a job in which I was going to be able to, I wanted to be able to continue to work in medicine, but I wanted to still integrate some part of my communication skills. So I was able to find a place here in rural Georgia where I was approached by a person who used to live in New York City, and he said, if you really want to do some good, come to a place like here, which is Southwest Georgia, where there are not enough physicians. Really, when you become a physician, you do want to go to a place where you think you are needed. I mean, at least that's the way that I look at things. I mean, to be very blunt, some places, in New York City just don't need any more physicians. I mean, they just don't.
I think you're very idealistic. I think there are many doctors who want to go where they can command top dollar or work in a prestigious clinic. I think that it's very, I don't know, that you might actually be in the minority in saying, I just want to go where I'm most needed. I don't know that that's the top of the list for a lot of people.
Right.
Maybe I'm too cynical, but, I'm just saying. But aren't they lucky in Georgia that that was you? Yeah.
Yes. And, that's the thing. There are plenty of physicians who do that. So why do we need another physician to do that? Don't we need some people to just go to a place where they are actually, there's a need, there is a desire, there is there's a vacuum here, and we needed to fill that. It needed to be filled. So I decided, as an adventurous person, I was going to come here. I was going to check it out for a year, and that was 8 years later. That's been 8 years now. So
was that just they were advertising for a doctor, or did you have connections in that city, or what brought you to that particular place?
It was I was just recruited by a person who lived here and who knew of me because he worked in New York City at some point. So there was no advertising. I knew nobody here. I literally up and left everything that I knew and moved to a rural community.
Now, there must have been a little bit of culture shock coming from these New York City hospitals in terms of resources and, Yeah, how did you handle that, the kind of culture shock or the realization like, wow, there's no this, there's no that, or, you know.
Right. So there is that initial moment. There definitely is. I can't even, pretend like there wasn't a moment where I was like, where am I? There's no public train system. There are no sidewalks. I mean, because it's so hot down here, I don't know where's my local bodega? I mean, really, where is it? There isn't one. And so there was a moment in which I really felt like, oh gosh, well, how am I going to do this? But the thing about it is, emergency rooms are what I found in working different places, that emergency rooms are emergency rooms everywhere. So the same person that comes in through the door at Bellevue is essentially the same person that comes through a rural hospital. They don't have any resources. They don't know where to go. They have fallen through a system, and they need your help. So once I got into working in the emergency room, I found myself very much at home. Yes, there were some cultural differences in the way that people spoke. I mean, there were certainly moments in which I would walk into a room and ask my nurse to come in with me and literally translate for me, because this person I know is speaking English. I know he said something to me. I know he or she said something to me. I'm just not sure what. And so there's definitely there was even just a dialect that I had to really do a double take with. But I felt that my presence was needed there, and I know that this community had gone for needed to be there. This is a predominantly predominantly Black community that is very poor, and I knew that the moment I was there that there was a reason for me being there, and that people could see that there was, even for the children that I take care of, that there's a person here that you can, not that you need to strive to be me, but there are things that you can, that are bigger than you, that your life is bigger than what you see in front of you right now. And I wanted to, in some ways, be that person. And I feel that every day that I work. And so that really overtook my initial, sort of surprise with with the cultural differences. I mean, and they're definitely there. I mean, there were definitely moments where I really wanted to go to my corner store, and there's no corner store. There's literally just you've got to go down the road to the gas station, and you've got to get into a car.
Yes,
there's no way around it.
Yeah, it is.
And driving for a while.
Rural is a very different situation. And your writing, you focused on obesity, and I'm assuming probably also diabetes, diseases prevalent in Black communities resulting from poor diet and nutrition.
Right.
Did you encounter that? I'm imagining you encountered that in Georgia.
Oh, well, it was amazing, because the problem with a lot of rural communities is that because there's a lack of sometimes transparency and a lot of transportation. It's hard for people to get to where they need to be. So I'm finding my very first couple of days here, I was really, I encountered a 12-year-old boy who was in actual heart failure. I mean, he was the largest. He was so obese that he had actually gone into congestive heart failure. And so here I am dealing with a very grown-up issue. I mean, heart failure is a disease of older people, of somebody who's been sick for a long time. This is, now I'm seeing it in the face of a 12-year-old boy. And I've got to very quickly figure out how to get this, how to help him, how to get him out of this critical phase where he's not able to breathe, where he's having a tough time, but then also try to get him involved and try to get his parents involved into a program so that this doesn't happen again, so that he can, we can get him into a better, some sort of program to exercise and to get him into better shape, because he's too young. That was the youngest I had ever seen. That wasn't born with a congenital problem. That is really pretty shocking
to think of a 12-year-old, with that kind of old person's problem.
Yes.
So
that hit me in the face.
I mean, was that a difficult thing dealing with the parents, especially you being the doctor and the outsider from New York, to be advising them about this?
I initially did have some apprehension about it, because yeah, I am an outsider in that way. And but I was able to, find a connection with the mother who works as a nurse, who worked as a nurse's aide, and my mom is a nurse's aide. So I was able to make a connection with her in that sense that, I know that life is hard. I know that, you don't have a whole lot of resources. I know that you don't have a lot of money. I know that things are difficult. So I was able to, once you're able to make that connection, I think you're able to then go from there. And you can then discuss things without the thought that, well, they're not going to really listen to me because I don't know where they're coming from. In fact, I do.
I think that's very important, and to understand that there's lists of things you could tell people that's good for them, but, they might not be things within their budget. They might not, there's a number of reasons why they might not be things they could implement. And
the other thing about it is what I found is that usually when I approach a patient or their family about a particular issue, whether it's a high blood pressure or obesity, and I just discuss some basic things, I will have been the very first person to ever have discussed this with them, which I find incredible. So in a lot of ways.
Yes, that's shocking. That's really shocking. Yeah, it just is. It's just a wake-up call about what the healthcare delivery system in these rural areas is about. And when we were speaking earlier, I think I shared with you, I had a friend who, ran into a great deal of trouble with rural health care for mental health and became heavily addicted to prescription, multiple, handfuls of pills a day. I mean, this is a woman who's 39. And ultimately ended up, in a suicide situation. But it just was this rabbit hole of terrible health care that just kept getting worse and worse and worse, Yeah, I think that's a kind of a problem in a lot of places. And this,
right.
The lack of information and, So what have you done around that?
Well, in a lot of ways, I see that, although I'm an emergency room physician, I feel that once you're coming to see me, our system has already failed. So I know that kind of sounds.
Yes, exactly. I think that's very, very true.
Once you walk through the door, I'm like, well, okay, where have we failed? Where have things gone wrong? I mean, we'll take care of you now, but things have clearly gone wrong. So my thoughts have always been about actually trying to keep people, outside of the emergency room.
It seems to me like that boy should have been, somebody in his school system should have flagged him. I mean, this boy was over 300 pounds or something.
Yes. He was 380 pounds.
To me that's, I'm surprised, but then I'm sure the resources of the rural educational system are stretched thin too. Yeah.
Right.
But that is amazing. You were the first person to sit down and have this conversation with this woman about something that everybody who looked at that boy, I am sure, had the same response. Oh my God, what's going on there? But nobody says anything.
Nobody said anything. Right. Nobody said anything. No one intervened. No one spoken to the mom. This is the first time she'd been hearing about any kind of programs that I was discussing, having our social worker talk to her about what we could offer. Never heard of it. I was like, okay, well, then we've got some fertile ground to work with here. Then.
Now, what were you able to steer her towards? What was available?
Well, there are some programs through the state did have some funds in which we could get this particular boy into different nutritional programs, and also getting somebody to come to the house to talk to them, which is where I find. We get most of our, that's where we gain most of our traction, is if we can get people to go to their homes and see about what's going on at the house. That is where I think the impact is going to be made in terms of even everyone's health care. And I know that can be very labor and cost intensive, but I think that's going to be that is the best way to do it. In terms of changing lives. And I know there are pilot programs that people are trying to do. But I think that should really be something that we spend a lot more time and effort and money into, making sure that people at their homes, going there and finding out what's in your cabinet, what's going on there, what's your day-to-day going on here. Once you find out.
When we'd spoken earlier, I said I write grants for a Somalian immigrant community here, the Bantus, and we've written several initiatives that involve funding for sending teams of people into every single home in the community, which is doable because it's about 2,000 people. We're not talking about, an entire state or anything, but it's incredibly effective, and it's also necessary because there's illiteracy even within their own language. It's not just illiterate in English. So sending anything to these homes or posting anything isn't going to, be meaningful. So it has to be people going and talking and looking at the prescription drugs and going over what the dosage is and the proper disposal and all that stuff, as well as the nutritional counseling and how to take blood pressure. And it's, but it's like, I see how effective this program is, and they're very motivated because it's an immigrant community that's up against a lot. But frankly, there's so many households throughout the state where I live that need that desperately. It's just they don't have the organizational motivation of some of these recent immigrant groups. But I feel like, oh my gosh, everybody could really benefit from these home visits. They're so powerful because you can see what you're dealing with. You can sit there and read the label of the prescription. You can have a discussion about, what's going on nutritionally. I don't know. Right. That would be such a huge national initiative, but it's really, yeah.
Really, that would be a game changer, to be very honest. Particularly in a place like where I'm at. I mean, places where it's just difficult to even geographically and physically get to.
But the problem is, like you say, to me it's like when they get to the emergency room, it's kind of like hockey. When it gets down to the goal cage, it's what happened to the team. It's really not the goalie's problem. It shouldn't have gotten there. And I think that, what we're seeing is that, the insurance system hasn't really been incentivized to cut costs. In fact, quite the opposite. But I think that's starting to change. But I feel like that it would be expensive, the kind of home visits and that preventative care you're talking about, but it's exorbitant by the time you land in the hospital, in the emergency room with the need for emergency surgery or something.
That's right, exactly. Like once you've hit the ER, well, all costs go out the window. Then you're not even talking about normal costs. You're talking things that are just not even, within people's comprehension. I think that prevention is the best way to preventing people from coming to the emergency room and discussing with them what they can do before they get there. So one of the things that I did was I was a news correspondent here for one of the local local stations, and I brought in some of my journalism skills and decided, what, I'm going to, on my own initiative, just go down to the station and start talking to them and ask them if I could just do a 1-minute spot every week and discuss some issue.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And can you tell us a series of what you've done on these 1-minute spots?
Oh, there's been about what to do with, very, very quickly. How do you treat the flu before you see me? What are the signs of it? Strep throat. I mean, things that are just very, very basic. Just discussing, some bullet points and taking it as a medical minute. And it was not something that I did for pay. It was purely volunteer. I didn't, it wasn't affiliated with my hospital. I did it on my own initiative. And I thought that just doing that alone was also just making sure that people knew, how to take care of themselves, how much water to drink. I mean, you would be surprised how many people don't know how much water to drink in a town that is hot 90% of the time. How to prevent kidney stones, because kidney stones are a manifestation of dehydration. So just stay hydrated. Those very, very basic.
That is it's wonderful. It's just looking at what one woman can do, and I bet they were very happy to run your medical minutes.
Yes, and so and also it was also one of the things where people would particularly with children, I'm very conscious of what they see and the images that they are looking at, and it was very rewarding for me to be in a town that's so small that when you do things like that, little kids come up to you and say, hey, I saw you yesterday and you talked about this and I remember you said that, and
oh my gosh,
little
that's
brown
brilliant.
girl be inspired by that.
That's great. You are really poised as a person to, you're in a position to do quite a bit of organizing because of the way you kind of branded yourself there, like having that, being a good community liaison. You know, sometimes I think that there's such a gap between the medical elitism and the average person on the street, and the communication is not always two ways. It's the great wisdom spills from the lips of the professional down to the little people, and it doesn't go the other way. And there isn't this symbiotic, are you meeting the needs of the population you're pretending to treat? Are you really listening to them? Are you, is it? Yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, I think you're in a position to teach your peer doctors about kind of this is what it looks like, but also to, just really do that outreach. I think that's wonderful. Well, did the situation with the boy, did it have a happy outcome?
Yes, we found later that he did lose some weight, and that he was able to, we were able to get him on some, we did have to put him on some medication for a while, but that he did get better, and that he no longer, he had become at some point he ended up coming back several times because he just wasn't getting better. So we were able to find out that that has stopped, and that he is actually doing much, much, much better. And, it had a happy ending in the sense that the mom really also took the initiative to also take care of herself, because she was in her 30s and already on oxygen. I mean, because she was just, so we were able to get her also into a system that, she was able to take care of, her medical problems, and they're doing much, much, much better. Both of them.
Well, that's it. That's good. That's good. And and a lot of that is, you're changing people's diets is huge, because it's an emotional issue, it's a cultural issue, it's an economic issue. It's a process, and
right.
It's a gradual one. Well, can we hop across the ocean a little bit and talk
Sure.
about your clinic? I know you hit so many hot spots, New York and rural healthcare, and now talking about African healthcare. I wanted to ask you, what is going on in Kenya and other parts of Africa in terms of HIV and AIDS? Where is that at these days?
Well, at this point, it is really the outreach for HIV/AIDS has really been very good in particularly in the different parts of Kenya that I've been to. I was in the most rural parts of Kenya that were not anywhere close to even the capital, Nairobi, and I found that many people were very much educated on, how, what they can do to prevent transmission, and how to treat people who have it. And then the governments have really stepped up to the plate in the sense that they now know that you have to take care of people who don't have those don't have the resources to get the medications that they need. And there's been a really big push through the different organizations. I believe UNICEF and Partners in Health, they are very good about making sure that that they're getting the education and the medications that they need. So I think that there's been a worldwide change in terms of how we view the treatment of HIV/AIDS. And that's been wonderful. It's been good to see, and it's been an evolution. But it's better in places like Kenya, but in some places it's still difficult because the economic and social situation is still very bad. So I know in the Congo, where I'm from, it is still a problem because it has never been a stable environment. Based just politically.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll find that any place in which the politics are still very unstable, this is an issue that is still not under great control yet. Getting there and better, but not where we want it to be.
Yeah.
So Kenya is much more, has been a place that has gone through its turbulence, but it has found a place in which people can discuss their politics and it not turn into, horrible violence, although there have been issues in the past. So because of that, I think that their healthcare system has improved. They have an infrastructure now to work on.
Yeah, these countries that are, so torn up with, war, violence right now, it seems like that would be very difficult to have any kind of healthcare infrastructure that was, that wasn't a crisis. Wasn't a crisis.
Right. Yeah. it even bears to you can even speak to even what's going on with Ebola, is that it's happening in places that are still very politically, very politically unstable, or have been for many years, and are only now just getting on some solid ground. So a lot of times what you find with medicine is that, and with science, is that the places in which things do not go the way that you want them to go it's a recipe for disaster if you don't have an infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, so you went over there, and were you doing emergency room medicine?
Yes, I was working at a clinic in which I brought my own supplies, and I worked with a team, a team of a couple of nurses, a couple of pharmacists, pharmacy techs, and people who just wanted to come help. And we set up a clinic, and it was very much, I will see and take care of anything that I can do with the equipment that I have here, with the equipment and the medicine I have here. It was very much
wow.
Something that we just decided to do in conjunction with the different, there would be a church there that we could work with that already had that would have like a space that we could use. So it was organized in that way, but we set it up as purely as a place where you can get immediate care right now. And it was amazing because I was seeing people who were walking for 100 miles. I mean, they would walk for miles with no shoes just to see because they knew that there's somebody there. There was a physician there that was there to just help them now. And sometimes I get discouraged by that because I think, well, I'm just helping them now, but how can I do stuff for a longer term? But sometimes what you do now in someone's life, as in the case of Mama's mother, it does help them in the long term. They're able to, you're able to make an impact in their whole life just in that moment. So,
well, I think that's a perspective you have to have. I think otherwise it just becomes overwhelming, like so much
right.
to do, so little to do it with.
Time and so little time. And
what country was this clinic in that you were working in?
This was in Kenya, and it was in a town called Kisumu. And it's a beautiful town. It's right off Lake Victoria. So it was a wonderful place to see how people who live very much with the earth, I mean, they fish out of Lake Victoria, they eat the plants that are from around Lake Victoria, and they're able to take care of themselves in that way. But because they don't have a whole lot of resources, we're dealing with, malaria is still an issue. I mean, really still an issue. And so you're able to treat children and make sure that they're able to, get through that sickness, which is still very much a problem in a lot of these communities.
So what you saw there was completely different from the Western problems in
yes.
Georgia, the obesity and diabetes and high blood pressure. You were seeing malaria and what else?
Yes, very different. And it was funny because we bought so many medications that we thought were going to be useful in terms of high blood pressure medicines and medicines for diabetes, and we didn't give out one of those, like not one, because no one had high blood pressure. Everybody walks everywhere. There are mountain ranges that they walk.
I was just going to say they're walking everywhere and they're eating natural food that's native to the location.
Yes.
I would think that that they would have possibly a baseline of health better than Georgia.
Right, much better. In fact, what we were finding is that if you could just intervene by just making sure that everybody had a net, which UNICEF is very good at doing, and Partners in Health are good at doing, then people could be malaria free, because that is ultimately, infectious diseases are the bigger problem there. Things that are communicable. That's the issue there. Parasites. Really rarely would you see a problem with high blood pressure, unless that was a purely genetic problem, which sometimes that is. But you never, and that was just a different paradigm. That was just a different way of looking at things. And because the baseline of patients are so good, they would turn around. I would be there. I would start somebody on an anti-malarial or some kind of cream for really bad eczema, and they would come back within 2 days and show me how they had improved. you can see it. It's not a subtle difference. And this was amazing to me. Just that
well,
little,
yeah, I know, because so many of the healthcare issues here come from years and years and years of abusing the body, and there isn't
right.
a cream, there isn't a pill, although we desperately wish there was, but, you know, for so many of these, it's changing lifestyle, changing habits of thought, or just possibly the way we live. It's incredibly high stress. It's, you know,
Incredible.
and
yeah,
nobody has time to walk hundreds of miles anywhere, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting, I would think that having had such a radically different medical experiences would just really make you such a valuable person to be doing the writing about healthcare and the liaison work, just having had the breadth of experience of such completely different cultures with completely different healthcare needs.
Right, and so a lot of the things that I do write, it ends up being about what I see, but it always has some sort of connection to an experience that I find is an international experience. I mean, you know, having also gone to Haiti 4 days after the earthquake, I mean, that was an experience that was incredible and shocking, but I was able to, I was once again there, I was able to see that, you know, people just need very little. They need very little to just get to be inspired to continue on, because their baseline needs are so much different from what we have here. So although I was in Haiti and I saw just horrible destruction. I mean, it was probably the worst scene anything I'd ever envisioned. And it was really like it almost felt like it was like a Civil War movie where people kind of come out with bandages and, you know, it really felt almost surreal. And yet there was so much hope and joy there. And just of a little bit that we could do to try to make someone's life, you know, easier, whether it's just changing a bandage or helping them, giving them, you know, an antibiotic to help them fight off the infection that will eventually lead to them losing a limb. Those basic things were so amazing and so helpful. And that gave me cause for pause, because I was like, wow, you know, this is a place where it's completely destroyed, but yet there is hope here. And, you know, I think that helps me to continue on and do the work that I do here.
That's amazing. To me, that sounds like a scenario where a lot of kind of starry-eyed idealists flying in from the West would get there and just be overwhelmed and kind of be on the next flight out, because it's,
yes.
you know, that just the misery, the chaos of that situation would be so overwhelming. It's really wonderful that you didn't have that experience, and that going through it you were able to see the hope and the joy in a situation where I imagine it would be very difficult to see hope and joy.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you another question, because you worked at Bellevue, which is sort of this enormous mental health facility. Could you speak a little bit about the difference in terms of mental health issues you see in the West from, say, the ones that you saw, or did you see any when you were working in your clinic in Kenya?
So I think that the issue with mental health is one that is, first, we don't give it enough. We don't focus enough on it anywhere. And that's just a general, you know, anywhere I've gone, I just don't think that mental health is getting the attention and the funds that it needs, because what you find in what I found in different places, like whether it was in Haiti or even in Kenya, is that people who have mental issues are actually put into this like almost like a box, and nobody lets them come out. So you don't know what's really going on. And I think the stress of just living in a place that's so impoverished forces people to deal with their sadness and their depression, and it's more inward. And it's very difficult to discuss that. It's very difficult to get people to admit that there's really, you know, there is really a problem here. So I'm finding that I find that there's more openness here in terms of discussing that. We're just not finding the funding. So when I work, for example, here, I find that we're losing more spaces to put people who need help, just to take care of them. Every day we're
Mm-hmm.
losing more spaces. But in places that I've been to in Kenya, it's just impossible to even talk about it because there is no place at all. So that is quite the challenge.
And when people are not talking about the mental health problems, what's the end game of that? What's the result when people have such serious grief or anger or depression or whatever, and they don't talk about it? What happens next?
Well, you end up having a lot of dysfunction within a family, and then and then it manifests itself in just a lot of anger, and you find children who are just who you find are just very sad. I mean, you can't, and it's not something that you can quantify, but you know that it ends up just being an inward issue. And that it just ends up, it manifests itself, I think, mostly in the children that I ended up seeing, and unfortunately,
and then it just goes on and on and on. And now we're actually finding out that trauma, changes the DNA and will literally show up in the genetic makeup of the next generation. Forget habits and patterns. It's like it's embedded in the cell.
It's there. Yeah.
I know. I guess I find there's some hope in that, but also some horror in it. Well, that's interesting. So that's what you saw in Kenya and Haiti was the not sharing of that.
No,
well,
and and maybe that's a way to deal with the day to day, because the daily life is so difficult. You cannot. The feeling is that we cannot discuss this because we have to get by and just get through the day. We live on 42 cents a day or something like that. In Kenya.
Well, I work in a lot of the people I write for, are survivors of sexual violence, and particularly child sexual abuse. And I've heard that so many times, that, with the PTSD, that just not talking about it, not really looking at it, because, these are people that are a paycheck away from, losing the rent. Right. And, often when someone, especially an incest survivor, really starts that work, it just opens a Pandora's box, and often, it's difficult to hold a day job when you're going through that. It's like a tornado hits your brain. And I've met a lot of survivors who make a conscious choice. I can't go there. I have to, I have to maintain a work schedule, and they just kind of intuitively know I am going to have to sit and look at the trees for 6 months if I go there. So it's almost it's sad, but it's like mental health is a luxury. It's getting mental health means you can move into someone's house and put on bedroom slippers for 6 months while you go through it, and that's just not an option for people with children or Yeah, and that makes me sad. Again, and when you're an unrecovered survivor, you don't move past your issues and you pass them on. I mean, it's one of those things where, penny wise, pound foolish. It's like what we're talking about with the preventative. That's going, and possibly that person will break down, and she didn't want to lose a couple of months of work, but maybe she'll be out years. After the breakdown.
At the end, after that happens, right.
Disabled on psychotropics. That's what happened to my friend. She, they put you on enough of those, and you become too debilitated to work. So the whole focus of our medical care delivery system needs to really shift to the preventative, and it's expensive to have certain kinds of treatment, but it's exorbitant if you don't. So that's that's the formula. So I see that we're about 5 minutes out from ending, so I just want to give you those 5 minutes if there's anything you want to wrap up with, or a story you didn't tell, or something that you really want to tell our listeners on this podcast.
Well, I really just wanted to, first of all, thank you for having this discussion with me. It's been truly enjoyable, and I've really enjoyed discussing some of the things that I find, that encourage me, to continue to do the work that I do. And I hope that anybody who's listening to this finds that, that you can find that you are able to follow your dream, and that that you can do that. And you can make an impact in other people's lives in very little ways. So I hope that I do serve as some sort of model for other people to do the work that they do and to feel inspired by that. And, I also just want to, just tell some people about some of the work that I'm doing now in terms of trying to, like we discussed, getting into alternatives in terms of going to the emergency rooms, and things that I'm doing now is just trying to set up a clinic in which people can, come to us, and we can take care of them at a cheaper cost and at half the time. Because what I've ended up finding is that, people come to the emergency room, they wait hours. I mean, just hours, and everybody involved is frustrated, including the people who work there. And so we're trying to, at a new clinic that I've opened up, Modern Emergent Care. It's we've been able to do to take all the complaints that people have about the emergency room. It's too slow, it takes too long, nobody listens to me, nobody spends any time with me, I'm not being heard. We have taken all of those and we have put it into a place where you are able to come and get the help that you need, and and actually be able to afford it. Because at some point, our system will get to the point where no one's going to be able to afford any of the care, and so we've got to start coming up with some models.
Well, I see that, these urgent care clinics, and yes, I see that. I'm seeing a proliferation of places because of that very thing. The emergency room has become something you don't want to have to go to because you have to wait so long. And especially if you've got a sick child. Yeah, a 6-hour wait with a sick child, that's a lot of fun,
That's it's horrible. It's just I'm upset for my patients. I'm upset. I mean, it just doesn't lead to a good interaction. It doesn't lead to a proper, doctor-patient relationship. So we're, let's try to change some things, and let's try to, just change the venue. Let's change the space. Maybe that.
Well, I think you're doing wonderful things in Georgia, but I really wish that you would just kind of become some national something or other where you can start all these national initiatives or consult with the president about how to, or, especially these insurance companies. I feel like a lot of your philosophies as well as your approaches strategically are things that need to be implemented so widely. You're like a little star in Georgia, but I just wish you cast a bigger light, because I feel like you are the change. You are the change that we have to come to. The healthcare system is really at a crisis point. It's sort of, health is something for only very rich people with trust funds, and everybody else gets to die, or we're going to have to just from the bottom up change all the priorities, the way we look at it, the values, everything. I just feel it's really so long overdue for an overhaul.
Right.
But it's heartening, though. It's heartening to talk to someone who's such a fireball and has has her head on right about all these issues. Well, we're kind of at the time now, so I just want to, before I hand you off to Jenny again, I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do. And you are that role model. I feel energized and inspired. Both times I talked with you, I felt like, wow, I'll have what she's having. It's really been an inspiration. So thank you very much, and here's Jenny again.
Thank you, Carolyn. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mana Kasongo-Robinson. You are an inspiration, definitely, and I think we need many more of you.
Thank you,
and
Jenny.
Thank you, Carolyn Gate.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining us and for all the work you do around the world. Thank you both. Thank you both.
Okay.
And you can go to Black Star News online at blackstarnews.com. It's an excellent resource for issues facing African states and African Americans. They have links for breaking news, New York Watch, U.S. politics, global politics, entertainment with music, books, and theater, money and investments, and health with information on exercising for good health, and global news on Ebola. That's a good way to keep up on that issue. And lots of links and lots of information. It's a real news source and resource to supplement the news that we don't hear here in the United States. And Dr. Kasongo also would like you to know about and join Partners in Health at PIH.org. Partners in Health believes that health is a human right, and brings the benefits of modern medical science to those most in need. And they serve as an antidote to despair. Partners in Health works in Haiti, Rwanda, Lesotho, South Africa, Malawi, Mexico, Russia, Peru, and on the Dene Navajo Reservation, where Native Americans struggle with some of the worst health outcomes in the United States. Please sign up for their email updates. Again, that's PIH.org. And we have a link to Dr. Kasongo's own clinic, Modern Emergent Care. That's modern, EMERGENTCARE.com, based in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Kasongo and the medical team there offer an emergency room alternative that is warm, inviting, and comforting and affordable at a fraction of the cost of most ER facilities, with half the wait time of traditional emergency rooms. So very innovative and definitely the new face of ER care. And you can sign up for Carolyn's newsletter at carolyngage.com. Carolyn tours in her own shows and is available for lectures and workshops on lesbian culture and history. Thank you again, Dr. Kasongo-Robinson and Carolyn Gage, and thank you for listening in. We hope we have informed and inspired you in many ways, and we hope you will try to catch more of the interviews in this series on feminism and sustainability, as well as our other podcast series and issues important to us as women. And please share the interviews with your family and friends. You never know who you may be inspiring. So no matter what your description or experience of feminism is, we hope to have heightened your understanding of feminism's important role in all aspects of sustainability and restored and strengthened your resolve to build alliances for the future. For it is clear, none of us are really alone. Keep listening. Bye for now.